Okay, welcome back to biology. This is the third video for chapter 1, the third and final one. And in this one, we're going to talk about the scientific method. So when we study nature, the way that scientists study is we make observations and then we form and test hypotheses. The word science comes from the Latin word that means to know. So science is all about knowing what is going on in the world around us, how the world around us is functioning. Inquiry is a search for information and explanations of natural phenomena. So when there is a lunar eclipse, what caused that lunar eclipse? Why are the tides going in or out? Why are barnacles growing on the side of the ship? These are all searching for that information is at the heart of science. The scientific process includes making observations, forming logical hypotheses, and then testing them. Those steps have to be included for it to be a scientific process. In the scientific method, you begin by making an observation. So I might observe that some of my tomato plants are taller than others of my tomato plants. Then I'll ask questions. Why are some of my tomato plants larger? Why are they forming more tomatoes or juicier tomatoes? What's the difference between my different plants? Then I'll form a hypothesis. So my hypothesis might be, well, these I had fertilizer and they got fertilized, and the other ones I ran out of fertilizer. Then I'll make predictions from the hypothesis. So my prediction would be, if I fertilize my tomatoes, they will grow taller and have juicier tomatoes. Then I'll test my predictions. I'll get some more plants and I will grow some of them with fertilizer and some of them without. I'll collect and analyze my results. I'll measure how tall my tomatoes grow. I'll measure how juicy my tomatoes are. And then report my findings. And my findings should be repeatable. So if I give my fertilizer to you, you would also see larger tomatoes. And anybody would be able to repeat that. When we make observation, we are describing natural structures and processes. And recorded observations are called data. There's two types of data, and both of them are important. One is qualitative data, and one is quantitative data. Qualitative data is describing the qualities of something. So it's recorded descriptions. It's how an animal is behaving, how a plant looks, what color it is. And quantitative data is going to be numerical measurements. So how much an animal weighs, how many leaves are on the tree, how tall something has grown. And data can be analyzed with statistics. Both qualitative and quantitative data can be analyzed with statistics. When we are forming and testing hypotheses, a hypothesis is a tentative answer to a well-framed question. So when we're talking about my tomato plants, my hypothesis, before I've had a chance to test it, I have the hypothesis that adding fertilizer to my plants will make them grow taller and have larger tomatoes. It should be a rational accounting for a set of observations. So I am able to see before that my plants that had fertilizer grew differently. So I have a rational accounting behind it. It's not just, I read a story about Tinkerbell, so I think fairies are coming to my house. That would not be rational because there wouldn't be rational observations behind that. And hypotheses can lead to predictions that can be tested. So I can test adding fertilizer or not. And I test them by making additional observations or by performing experiments. I can observe how my tomatoes are growing with or without fertilizer. There are two types of hypotheses, and you need to be comfortable making both of these hypotheses. One hypothesis is called the null hypothesis, and the other is the alternate hypothesis. The null hypothesis says that the variable is null. Null means nothing. So the experimental variable has no effect on the data, or that there is no statistically significant difference between the control and experimental groups. So my null hypothesis might be that the growth of tomatoes was not due to different types of seeds. The growth of my tomatoes was not due to the quality of soil. So that would be null hypothesis. My tomatoes did not grow differently because of bugs in the environment. The alternate hypothesis says that it's not null. It's an alternate to null. It's doing something. the experimental variable has an effect on the data. So the difference between my control and experimental groups is not just random chance. The difference between my taller tomato plants and smaller tomato plants is that I had fertilizer on some of them. That's an alternate hypothesis. In a scientific method, so one example, we'll have an observation that your flashlight doesn't work. So the question is, why doesn't your flashlight work? From this, we can have two hypotheses, and both of them are testable. Hypothesis 1 is the batteries are dead. I can test that. I can predict that if this is true, if this is my alternate hypothesis, batteries are dead, then replacing the batteries will fix the prediction, will fix the problem. So I test it, I replace the batteries. The result is my flashlight doesn't work. That means my hypothesis is contradicted. So I go back and revise my hypothesis and I say this hypothesis was contradicted. I need to form a new hypothesis. So then I form a second alternate hypothesis that my bulb is burnt out. So if my bulb is burnt out, then I would predict that replacing the bulb would fix the problem. As an experiment, I replace the bulb, and the result is my flashlight works. My hypothesis is supported. When we are talking about reasoning helps you figure out when you're forming a hypothesis and making observations and predicting what will happen next. There's two different types of reasoning. Inductive reasoning draws conclusions through logical process of induction, and it is taking repeated small observations, and from those repeated small observations, you can lead to a generalization. So today, when I saw the sun rising, it rose in the east. Yesterday, when I saw the sunrise, it rose in the east. Everybody who sees the sunrise has always seen the sunrise in the east. So my inductive reasoning will lead to the conclusion the sun will always rise in the east. I started with small observations and led to a larger generalization. On the other hand, there's deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning uses general premises to make specific predictions. So if I have a bag of coins, I can't see what's in it, but every time I pull out a coin, I've seen a penny, then I can predict from my generalization that every time a coin is pulled out, there's a penny. From that, I can deduct that next time I pull out a coin, I'll pull out a penny. That's deductive reasoning. Your initial observations can give rise to hypotheses, and then you pull out a specific prediction. And one thing to remember with a hypothesis is that you can never prove that a hypothesis is true. At any point in the future, someone could gather new information that disproves your hypothesis. But the more you test the hypothesis, the more you can be confident in your data. So if my hypothesis is that my fertilizer gives bigger tomatoes, I can test it multiple times. I test it in different types of soil. I test it with different types of tomato plants. I test it growing in a greenhouse or growing outside. I test it when there's ample rain or when there's extra rain or when there is too little rain. I test it in shady areas. I test it in sunny areas. I've tested it so many times that I can get confidence that my hypothesis is true. To be a hypothesis, it must be testable and falsifiable. Not all questions are things that can be addressed by science. So a hypothesis that ghosts fooled with the flashlight is not something that I am capable of testing. I can't test it and I can't falsify that. So that's not the realm of science. Things that are supernatural, things that are religious, although they can be very important, and they could be true. But those explanations are outside the bounds of science. So we are not going to experiment in science to prove or disprove things like prayer or spirits or things that are supernatural or religious. It doesn't mean they're not true. It means that it is not within the bounds of science. Okay, when we do science, to really have confidence in the data we're collecting, we perform what is called a controlled experiment. A controlled experiment is a scientific experiment that includes two groups. The control group is a group where nothing is changed. The control group is the control to be able to compare things against. So in my tomato experiment, my control group would be the group that gets nothing. It doesn't get any of my fertilizer. My experimental group would be the group that only that one thing is changed, and that is getting fertilizer. I could have multiple experimental groups that get different amounts of fertilizer, but that is the only thing that has changed. Between my control group and my experimental group, I make sure that I give them the same amount of water. I make sure that I grow them in the same yard. I make sure that they get the same amount of sunlight. I make sure that I start growing them, I plant them at the same time, and I harvest them at the same time. Only one thing has changed, and the only thing different between my control group and my experimental group is my variable that I'm trying to measure, how much fertilizer affects the growth of tomatoes. A variable is any factor that can vary. And in science, there are two types of variables that are important. One is the independent variable, which is what researchers are changing. The amount of fertilizer I apply is something that I am changing. That is my independent variable. The dependent variable is seeing if there's any changes, any variation that is being measured. So how tall do my tomato plants get? How juicy are my tomatoes? Those are dependent variables, whatever is being measured. If I am testing a new medicine, the independent variable would be the dosage of medicine, and the dependent variable would be how well my patients recover. Science is pretty flexible, although we have this idealized scientific process. In real world, that textbook method is typically not perfect. There's going to be backtracking. There's going to be rethinking. It involves weighing societal benefits and outcomes. It weighs community analysis and feedback. And it weighs what is being explored and what has been discovered. This is an interesting case study. I didn't go through this in class with you, but let's just go through it in this video because we have time in a video. So color patterns of animals vary widely in nature, even within members of the same species. For example, there are two populations of mice. They're of the same species, Paramiscus paleonotus, but they're different color patterns. And we tend to find in beach populations, we tend to find lighter colored mice. And in inland populations, we tend to find these more brown mice. The beach mouse lives on white sand dunes with sparse vegetation, and the inland mouse lives on darker soil. So we see mice that are kind of matching with regards to their fur color compared to their environment. So the two types of mice match the pop coloration of their habitats. One thing that it was observed is that natural predators of these mice are all visual hunters. So predators might be birds flying overhead, being able to see, have to be able to see the mice to swoop down to gather the mice. So this scientist, Francis Bertodi Sumner, hypothesized that color patterns have evolved in these mice populations as adaptations to protect the mice from predators. So Hopi Hekstra and some students tested this hypothesis to see, did color patterns, is that an evolutionary adaptation to protect the mice? So the researchers predicted that mice that did not match the habitat would be preyed on more heavily compared to mice that did match the habitat. They built mouse models. You can see them in these pictures here. These are mouse models. They are painted to match their surroundings and placed in equal numbers of each type of model in the habitat. So some light mice in each habitat and some dark mice in each habitat. Some of them were camouflaged, which were the control groups, and some of them were not camouflaged, which was the non-camouflaged groups were the experimental groups. And then they recorded signs of predation. So how often were these animal models predatorized? In the controlled experiment, the experimental group, or the non-camouflaged mice, is compared with the control group, which is the camouflaged mice. And ideally, you only want one variable, so everything else about these groups was kept the same. The experimental and control groups differed only in that one factor, whether they were camouflaged or not. Without those controls, the researchers wouldn't be able to rule out other factors besides model color. It could have been something else entirely that could have affected the results. In the context of science, a theory is broader in scope than a hypothesis. It is general and can lead to new testable hypotheses and is supported by a large body of evidence in comparison to a hypothesis. So a theory doesn't mean, I have this theory, I just have this idea. It's not something that you just randomly thought up. It's not a thought experiment. It's not something philosophical that may or may not be true. It is something that is supported by a large body of evidence. It is something that is widely accepted as what goes on in reality. A theory is not a law. A scientific law describes what happens in nature. So the law of gravity tells you that objects with mass are attracted to each other. So the mass of the earth pulls you towards it. The mass of the moon pulls you towards it. Scientific theories explain why things occur. So the theory of evolution explains why we have a diversity of species on our planet now. Scientific theories do not become laws. So it's not like if eventually a theory is accepted long enough, it's just not ever going to be a law. Although laws can be used during the formation of theories. And just as some finishing thoughts to finish on, the scientific method is what separates real science from pseudoscience. Real science makes limited claims based on evidence. So all matter is made of atoms would be part of science. It's been tested repeatedly and is supported by tremendous amounts of evidence. This is in comparison to pseudoscience, like if you buy my concoction, 1 tablespoon a day will heal you of all your aggravations. That's an exaggerated claim, as little to no evidence. That would be pseudoscience. Science benefits from a cooperative approach and from diverse viewpoints. Most scientists work in teams, which often include graduate and undergraduate students. Good communication is important in order to share results through seminars, publications, and websites. Scientists check each other's claims by performing similar experiments. We build on the work of others. If experimental results are not repeatable, the original claim will have to be revised. It's not unusual for different scientists to work on the same research question. When I was in graduate school, I worked a lot on platelets and how platelets stick to each other to form a clot. And we would cooperate with people in other countries and other labs and share data to develop our theories and our experiments. Diversity is important in science. Science doesn't have a great history of diversity, or not giving credit to a lot of diversity in science. Although at this point we do now live in a culture where people of all different viewpoints are finally being welcomed in as scientists. No matter who you are, there is a place for you within the world of science. Science benefits from diverse views, different racial and ethnic groups, both women and men. Having different people with different backgrounds have different ways of seeing the world and can come up with better explanations and better experiments to have better science. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 1. We'll come back and talk about chapter 2 next. Chapter 2, we get to start getting into chemistry, atoms and molecules, and how molecules are formed and what holds bonds together. So a lot of chemistry coming up next. I'll see you back then. Bye.